Good afternoon. It's time to get started. Welcome. My name's Clayton Lewis. I'm the Curator of Graphics at the Clements Library, and it's my honor to play the role of MC and host for today's panel discussion on John James Audubon and the Quadrupeds. This event is jointly sponsored between the Clements and the Special Collections Library, and today we'll be particularly looking at John James Audubon's Viviparous Quadrupeds of North America, which was his final large-scale project. This event is being videotaped and will be available on the Clements website in the future, along with many of our past lectures, which have also been videotaped in this room. And as always, we're very grateful for the University Library in providing this space and the services for us to be able to do this. I'm very honored to be moderating an excellent panel. We will hear how John James Audubon's quadrupeds were acquired by the university, what the units like the Clements and Special Collections mean to the student experience on campus, and about the physical and technical aspects of both Audubon's birds and beasts. We should have time for some discussion among the panelists and questions from the floor at the end. Our goal here for this event is to highlight how Audubon's viviparous quadrupeds can contribute to our quest to be leaders and best. For me, historical materials that are visually stimulating, like these Audubon prints, bring the past vividly alive. They radiate an intangible aura. These huge printed pages in their original format are inspiring in ways that can't be easily reproduced. And for scholars, if you're not inspired about your work, then you're not doing your best work. And this is why we have a Clements Library and a Special Collections Library on campus. It's as much about inspiration as it is information. Audubon's life and work have a lot to teach us about America then and now. Currently, we are often examining the world through the prism of identity, how our national, cultural, racial, gendered identity shapes the world that we perceive, and vice versa. Audubon deliberately constructed a personal identity, that of the exotic American woodsman, that was far removed from his colonial, French, Caribbean, African origins. The how and why that he did this make John James Audubon a very revealing Atlantic world figure who was born of that era of revolutions that's so exciting to historians. And then there's the graphic arts history. For centuries, America lagged behind Europe and Asia in the art in science of printing. The quadrupeds are a measure of how far America had come in the graphic arts. We'll hear more about that. By 21st century standards, John James Audubon is something of a dubious figure. A failed businessman, a liar who invented credentials and scientific data, who hid his identity and adopted another. But this is certainly unfair. In the midst of the 19th century's cultural investment in the ideals of romanticism, a belief in tangible spirituality, with faith in the pseudosciences, Audubon's inventions and tall tales are only par for the course. John James Audubon's real accomplishments in science, in art, and business are extraordinary. That he achieved the success through an invented persona is part of what finally makes him so very American. So our panel today will start with Kevin Graffagnino, director of the William L. Clements Library. Kevin has been director since 2008. Prior to that, Kevin served as executive director of the State Historical Societies of Kentucky and Vermont, as library director at the Wisconsin Historical Society, and as curator in special collections at the University of Vermont Library. Kevin has degrees from the University of Vermont and the University of Massachusetts, is the editor and author of 17 books on various aspects of American history and antiquarian book collecting. As director of the Clements, Kevin has focused, enhanced the Clements holdings, expanded the library's resources, our public programming, and its participation in campus activities across the board. Kevin has also been responsible for the planning and management of the complications related to the renovation to the original 1923 Albert Kahn Clements Library building that is currently underway. Kevin will be speaking about how this particular set of Audubon quadrupeds came to the university. He will be followed by Martha O'Hara Conway, Director of the Special Collections Library at the University Library here. Martha earned her BA from Mount Holyoke College, studying French and Russian, and her master's in Information and Library Science from the University of Michigan. Martha is a Wolverine through and through, although we've also discovered through the analysis of the quadrupeds that she has a certain thing about squirrels that we were unaware of before. Martha provides vision, leadership, strategic direction, and administrative oversight for the operations, services, programs, and resources of the Special Collections Library. Martha worked previously for the Newberry Library, Yale University Library, and Library of Congress. She's an active member of the Society of American Archivists and the Rare Books and Manuscripts section of the Association of College and Research Libraries. Martha will be speaking about student engagement in the university's special collection libraries. Martha will be followed by Kathleen Baker, who is conservation librarian and exhibits conservator at the University Library. Kathy received her training in paper conservation at the Courtauld Institute of Art, University of London in the 1970s, and returned to the U.S. to teach in the Cooperstown Buffalo Art Conservation Graduate Program from 1978 through 1993. In 1985, Kathy received a master's in art history from Syracuse University, and her thesis on the publication, history, and technical analysis of John James Audubon's Birds of America won 2 academic awards. After receiving an MFA in Book Arts in 2000 and a PhD in Communications in 2004, both from the University of Alabama, Kathy began her career at the University of Michigan Library as Senior Paper Conservator in 2005. And currently she is Conservation Librarian and Exhibits Curator. She will be speaking about the differences in printing between the birds and the beasts. And at this point, Kevin, would you like to continue? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out on such a lovely spring day. As Clayton has indicated, my job today is to talk about how the Audubon Quadrupeds set made its way to the University of Michigan. Our story begins in January of 2014 when Clarence Wolfe of the G.S. McManus firm in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, called me. Clarence and the McManus Company have been selling us Americana for 40-plus years. It has been a mutually beneficial arrangement in which we have purchased a great deal of material and Clarence has sold a great deal of material. Clarence told me that he and 3 other dealers had acquired a set of the Audubon Quadrupeds, and he asked if the Clements Library would be interested in purchasing it. Like everyone else on this campus, I knew that the Audubon Birds was the first library acquisition of the University of Michigan after moving from Detroit to Ann Arbor in 1837. So I just assumed that at some point we must have purchased the quadrupeds as well so that we would have both of Audubon's great masterworks on this campus. So I told Clarence that, said I would check and then I'd get back to him. So I looked in Merlin, and there was no listing for a 150 elephant folio color lithographed plates set of Audubon in Merlin. But since I don't do things with computers particularly well, I had 2 of my young curators check for me. And they also found no edition of Audubon from the 19th century except the small octavo set that was sold to the general masses in the early 1850s. Knowing I was about to jump off a very high financial cliff if I kept going with this, I called Clarence back, and I said that we did not, in fact, own the Audubon folio set, and I asked with considerable trepidation how much one might cost if we were to purchase it. Now, Clarence Wolfe is one of the world's great salespeople. If you've ever purchased anything from McManus, you've had a joyous experience knowing that you got it for the best price, it's the most wonderful copy in the world, and aren't you lucky? But Clarence is also smart enough to know that I lack the devil may care, it's only money approach to acquisitions that some of my Clements predecessors have featured in their acquisitions programs. So he reels me in slowly whenever the price is high. It's a gorgeous set, Kevin. Well, of course it is. Anytime a dealer calls me about something expensive, it is always a flawless and exemplary copy. It's a very important set, Kevin. Naturally. It couldn't be anything else, Clarence, or you wouldn't have called me. My 3 partners and I have set a price for the rest of the world, but for the Clements only, we are going to offer a substantial discount. How very generous of you fellows. Where do I sign? After several minutes of this pleasant and soothing patter, we finally arrived at the numbers. The 4 dealers, whom I have come to think of as the Beastie Boys, had put a price of $720,000 on their Audubon set. For the Clements, just because they love us above all other libraries, they were willing to drop the price to $540,000, a 25% reduction, and give us 2 years to pay for it. Now, Clarence may indeed be one of the world's great salespeople, but I am certainly one of the world's great whiners when it comes to buying something expensive. So now he got to listen to my patter and my routine. That's a lot of money, Clarence. There are those who love it, but the Clements is only a small and impoverished library. You have to understand. The renovations project is chewing up all of my discretionary funds, and that's actually true. Once in a while I try to put a fact in there somewhere. 2 years is not long enough to pay such a large bill, and of course, after all I've done for you, Clarence, this is the way you treat me? Clarence listened politely, told me he would get back to the boys for further consultation, and he would be in touch. This is an elaborate dance he and I have gone through a number of times in 6 years. The next day he called me again. I did my very best, Kevin, and I have gotten you a better deal. $480,000, which is now a 33% drop from the list price, and 3 years rather than just 2 to pay for it in 4 equal annual installments of $120,000 apiece. All right, I thought, now I have something concrete to work with here, something to consider. So I sat down and started making a list of what are the pluses if we went forward with this. And I could think of a few quite readily. First, we could bring a tremendously valuable and important piece of 19th century Americana to the University of Michigan. After all, the Audubon Quadrupeds is acknowledged as the most important color plate book printed in the United States in the 1800s. It's a big deal. 2, we knew that the Quads has tremendous research value for students and scholars alike in American history, environmental studies, natural history, art, and a dozen other departments on this campus that could use it for educating graduate and undergraduate students. 3, the Clements does already own most of the other great illustrated works on early America. We have Catesby's Natural History, Bodmer's illustrations for Prince Maximilian's Travels in the Interior of North America, Catlin's North American Indian Portfolio, Lewis's Das Illustrata Mississippital, Bayer's Album of Virginia, War's Sketches in North America and the Oregon Territory, etc., etc. All of them, I might add, titles we couldn't afford to purchase if we didn't already own them, something I tried to impress on Dr. Wolf without much success. Thank God my predecessors were buying these things when they were at prices that we could actually pick them up for, and or that Mr. Clements had donated them to us in 1923. And 4th, and I thought this was important, acquiring such a high-profile rarity for the university in the early stages of the Victors for Michigan campaign would highlight the collecting units on this campus and remind everyone in the UM community that the libraries and museums here are the heart and soul of this university. and that we in fact deserve all of the $4 billion the campaign is raising. So there were some very good positives. There were some real reasons to want to do this, aside just from acquisitive directors like to collect, which of course is a major reason as well. And against those pluses, I had only one, a tiny little negative, which was that pulling the trigger on the purchase would pretty much gut the Clements Library's acquisitions program for the next 3 years. Now, this was an unimportant concern at best, as I always tell my wife Leslie when I'm thinking of spending her money on something expensive at home. But nonetheless, in order to move ahead on something like that without cutting all Clements Library staffs by 30% for the next 3 years, which I've always thought of as a sound leadership option when there are great acquisitions to make, I had to begin the search for what my investment advisor brother calls OPM, which is other people's money. And my first step was the B.H. Breslauer Foundation in New York City. It's a charitable institution that exists for the sole purpose of helping rare book libraries buy expensive treasures. The Breslauer Foundation had given us a generous grant in 2012 towards the acquisition of Henry Lewis's Das Illustrerte Mississippital, and I was hopeful they might help us again with the Audubon set. It was a little too soon, but I went ahead and asked anyway. And to my considerable relief, the Breslauer board said yes, and yes quickly. They provided a grant of $120,000 to cover the first annual payment. All right. I had a starter fund. We were moving. We weren't galloping, but we were moving at least. And then I felt comfortable saying, well, all right, who on this campus would like to partner with the Clements Library in this acquisition? And I turned to, knowing that the Audubon birds, of course, live here in the Hatcher Library. They are on the 7th floor in the Special Collections Department. So I went to Martha Conway, my friend and peer, and said, would you like to team up on this? The Clements and Special Collections doing it together. And Martha and her boss, University Library Associate Librarian Brian Skibb, quickly said yes, and with considerable enthusiasm. And I have to say that significantly raised my opinion of the University Library bureaucracy. I thought this was great. No committee, no open forums to discuss. They were ready to go. So my next step was to write to Alfred Taubman, who has been one of this university's greatest philanthropists and also a very prominent Audubon collector. So I knew he would understand why this was something we might want to acquire. I wrote to him. Mr. Taubman replied by return mail with a generous check for the second annual payment. So now we had half the money. We really were rolling. And we had 2 years grace on securing the rest because the first 2 annual payments were already covered. The Beastie Boys have sent the set out to us, trusting us for the annual payments. They are in 3 elephant folio volumes for the 150 lithographed prints and 3 octavo volumes for the descriptive text on the prints. The volumes are in splendid physical condition, as you can see examining the ones we have on view in the Audubon gallery behind you. We have cataloged them for Merlin, so that now the campus and the world should be aware of their existence and their presence here at UM. And one of the reasons I love rare book library work is acquiring stuff. I like working in this field because I like the original materials. And it was a lot of fun bringing this hunt to a successful, if improbable, conclusion. First, we have acquired a magnificent, wonderful resource for this university. Second, we've made the University of Michigan one of a handful of American schools that have both the Audubon birds and the Audubon quadrupeds in their first edition glory. 3, we've brought a teaching and research resource and asset to UM that very few colleges and universities can offer their students and their faculty. And 4, we have fulfilled the noble goal of reminding the world that UM's libraries and museums are the most important units on this campus. We will be publicizing this with some enthusiasm in the days ahead. It's going to be very hard to top all of that in the future, but one of the great things about this profession is there's always something else to acquire. There's always something around the next corner that Clarence or somebody else is going to call about and offer to us. So I am really hopeful that we can use the joint acquisition of the Quadrupeds as a springboard for bigger and better collections initiatives among the research libraries on the campus. And if that happens to turn out to be the case, you folks will hear about it. Thank you.
Okay. On behalf of the University Library, I would like to thank you all for coming out to this afternoon's event. Also on behalf of the University Library, and especially on behalf of the Special Collections Library, I would like to thank Jennifer Poteet for her very generous gift toward the very special acquisition we are celebrating today. Most of you already know that Jennifer also gave very generously toward the creation of the Audubon Room. And I think it's entirely appropriate for us to thank her again on this occasion for that gift. So thank you, Jennifer, very much for your ongoing and very generous support of this library. Okay, so I have been asked, actually I volunteered, I said I'll do this, to speak for a few minutes about how we, in partnership with faculty in various units across campus, are creating opportunities for students to engage with our collections in meaningful ways. I will share with you 3 examples. We'll go in chronological order, starting with a 15th century Italian manuscript and ending with the papers of 3 maverick American filmmakers. About a year ago, Professor Stefano Mengozzi brought his class to the Special Collections Library to view one of our many books of hours. A book of hours, the most common type of medieval illuminated manuscript extant, is the official set of Christian prayers, marking the hours of each day and sanctifying the day with prayer. Not long after that visit, Dr. Mengozzi and 5 other singers recorded a selection of Gregorian chants at St. Thomas the Apostle Catholic Church here in Ann Arbor. The singers, most of whom are students in the School of Music, Theater, and Dance, sang from an extraordinary manuscript, the richly illuminated late 15th century antiphonary you see here. An antiphonary consists of the sung parts of the Liturgy of the Hours, and its large size makes it easily read by all of the members of the choir. The antiphonary and the recording are featured in an online exhibit created by Pablo Alvarez, Outreach Librarian and Curator in the Special Collections Library. And engaging with this beautiful manuscript in this singular way is an experience that none of the singers are likely to forget. Moving forward about 400 years, and from the University Library to the William L. Clements Library, let's consider the following. What can we learn from 2 photo albums assembled by an African-American woman and her family in the last decades of the 19th century? Quite a bit, as it turns out, which is exactly what the students in Professor Martha Jones's Black Women in the United States class discovered last fall. The albums belonged to Arabella Chapman, an African-American woman from Albany, New York. They were assembled between 1878 and 1900 and include portraits of Arabella herself, her family and friends, and well-known public figures, including Abraham Lincoln, John Brown, and Frederick Douglass. By taking the albums apart, literally, they took them apart, examining the photographs in great detail, and directing their questions to the albums themselves, The students had a unique opportunity to learn how African Americans assembled their own images to craft counter-narratives that challenged a rising tide of racism, and to create a compelling and lasting portrait of themselves as they hoped to be seen and remembered. This one-of-a-kind experience will certainly be remembered by Professor Jones's students. Let's return now to the University Library, to this very space, actually, where next week we'll be installing an exhibit titled Orson Welles, Beyond the Canon and Into the Archives. The exhibit commemorates not only the 100th anniversary of the birth of Orson Welles, but also the 3rd anniversary of what has proven to be one of the most rewarding and fun things that we in Special Collections have ever taken on. And that's saying a lot, because there's a lot that's both rewarding and fun in Special Collections. The Altman, Sales, and Wells exhibits are each the result of a productive and promising partnership between Screen Arts and Cultures and the University of Library, in which students have the opportunity to engage directly and deeply with primary source material, with unique collections that document and reveal everything from profound artistic insights to the daily business of writing, directing, and releasing independent films. I think the exhibits themselves and the students who have had more than a hand in their creation provide the best testimony to the value of the experience. According to one of those students, Catherine Sherry, developing an exhibit to be experienced by a mainstream audience infuses the course with palpable energy. It creates another level of involvement, she says. It's not simply going to class, listening to a lecture, writing a paper. You're actually learning about this person through his own documents. These are primary sources. It gives you a sense of ownership. It's exciting. Indeed it is. Exciting, that is. So, what's next? How can we engage students in equally meaningful ways with the treasure we are celebrating today? I'm sure some of our colleagues here today have a few very good ideas, as does Professor Phil Deloria, who says Audubon's masterpieces are quintessential liberal arts teaching tools because of the way they bridge the natural sciences, the social sciences, and the humanities in one beautiful, evocative package. And with that, I will turn things over to Kathy Baker, who will tell us about the history and production of Audubon's beautiful and evocative work. Thank you.
Hello, thank you all for coming. Can you hear me all right? I'm going to be talking about the production of Audubon's folio plate volumes. We're so lucky to have these works of art here, but we can't forget the fact that they are actually also works of science. And it was one of the problems that Audubon had when he was looking for a publisher for the Birds of America, to try to convince the scientific community in the late 1820s that he was a bona fide scientist. But that's another story. I'll be going through the Birds of America first because chronologically it came first, and then follow up by the viviparous quadrupeds. Here is just a very brief timeline of the Birds of America, Audubon's life. He was born Jean Rabin in Haiti. He was the illegitimate son of a sea captain, Jean Audubon, and Jeanne Rabin. And for most of his childhood, he lived in France with his father's family. His stepmother was very tolerant. At the turn of the century, he immigrated to the United States to work on his father's plantation. And in 1810, he reports meeting Scottish ornithologist Alexander Wilson. And after meeting Wilson, Wilson was on a tour of the United States making his drawings for the Birds of America, his version of that work. And when Wilson reportedly tried to sell Audubon a copy of his work, Audubon decided that he would make his own copy. Thank you very much. In 1827, and I'm skipping a lot here, obviously, after failing to interest any Philadelphia publishers, Audubon found a willing Edinburgh in Scotland publisher, W.H. Lazars, who actually did publish Alexander Wilson's book. Lazars engraved the first 5 plates, including plate 1, seen here, the wild turkey, which is probably the most famous plate in the Audubon's Birds of America. In 1828, very early in that year, Lazar's hand colorists went on strike, and Audubon decided not to go with Lazars and moved down to London to talk with Robert Havell Sr. And Havell Sr. agreed to undertake the work, but he was actually quite ill, and so it was his son, Robert Havell Jr., who, in fact, was responsible for getting almost the entire work done. And you can see here, this is how the credit for the engraving, printing, and coloring is noted on virtually every plate. This differs a little bit from plate to plate, depending on how early in the publication you find or you're looking at a plate. Of course, he did not do all of the engraving, all of the printing, and all of the coloring by himself. He simply supervised the work. From 1827, therefore, until 1838, approximately 200 full sets were published, which comprised 435 intaglio hand-colored plates, or a total of about 87,000 prints, which is a staggering number of prints when you think about it. Also accompanying the plates are 5 text volumes that actually very few people know about, called the Ornithological Biography, or an account of the habits of the birds of the United States of America. And this was, in fact, published in Philadelphia from 1832 to 1839. Very briefly, how the university libraries came to purchase the Birds of America. In June of 1838, the production part of the Birds of America, the plate volumes, wrapped up. Havell eventually moved to New York State and became a minor Hudson River School painter, which I found out about when I was doing my thesis. In February of 1838, at a U of M Board of Regents meeting, Dr. Zena Pitcher moved to purchase the work, and presumably the regents voted in favor of this motion. In March of 39, Pitcher told the regents that New York bookseller William Coleman had a complete set, including the first 4 volumes of the Ornithological Biography. Volume 5 was published later in 1839. And on the 26th of April, 1839, a check for $970 was sent to Coleman for purchasing the work. In 1997, this amount was calculated to be about $20,000. And also in 1997, complete sets of the Birds of America were selling for millions of dollars. So that investment was a pretty good one. Not that we would ever sell our set, but anyway. It's always nice to know that you have a real treasure among you. Soon after the purchase, the book was placed in the general stacks of the Graduate Library. And it's reported that anybody could walk into the library and take the book out of the stacks, or it was on some sort of podium, and finger through it. And indeed, when you look at the condition of the book today, it is quite clear that people did, in fact, finger through the book when their hands weren't quite as clean as they might have been. Being in the general stacks continued for many decades until about 1915, when the work went into the newly established rare book room in the graduate library. In September of 2009, as has already been mentioned, the Audubon room, which you see behind you, was opened, and one volume of the Birds of America is always on display in its special case, and a page is turned each week, usually on Monday morning. It will take more than 8 years to show all 435 plates. In fact, probably a little bit longer than that, because at Thanksgiving, we usually have one of the turkey plates open for a couple of weeks, and just this last fall we had the passenger pigeon celebration plate was open for a couple of weeks. So there are occasional little lulls in the showing of the plates, but they are there for people to see, and it's a real treat to be able to see a new bird every week. I'm going to go briefly through some major features of this book. The 435 plates were originally bound in 4 volumes in sets of 100, 100, 100, and 139 plates, 35 plates, sorry. And the typical binding you see here was a red leather binding with marbled paper sides. And this is almost certainly how the university library bought their set, bound in a binding very, very similar to this. This binding that you see here belonged to Syracuse University. In 1933-1934, William C. Hollins, who was superintendent of the university's printing and binding department, oversaw the rebinding of the 4 plate volumes into 8 volumes. And this is how they are presently bound, in brown leather with beige cloth sides. And in each of these volumes, there are about 50 plates, except when you get towards the end, and then they have to catch up with the 135 plates. So that's evenly divided into about 62, 63 plates each, or however it works out. The Audubon's Birds of America were issued in sets of 5 plates per number. So in the upper left-hand corner in the plate mark, you'll see the number, which is always in Arabic number, and the plate number is almost always in Roman numerals. The plates were issued as one large plate, constituting plate number 1 or plate number 6, ending in 106, and it fills nearly the entire sheet of paper. The medium-sized plate follows, and it fills about 3/4 of a sheet of paper, and then that's followed by 3 small plates that obviously featured smaller birds. The Birds of America was printed on handmade paper, a size called double elephant, and the untrimmed sheet measures about 40 inches by 30 inches. This is a very large sheet of paper. All of the paper was made in England at 2 paper mills owned by different people and watermarked either J. Watman or J. Watman Turkey Mill, and the date was included in the watermark underneath. I hope you can see that. This is 1838. All the birds are rendered life-size, from the very smallest, like this little wren, to the very largest, the flamingo. Depicted are 497 species and 1,065 individual birds. By the end of the work, many more birds had been discovered, but the ultimate number of plates had already been determined, and so groups of different species were included on a plate. The Birds of America were printed using an intaglio technique, where lines or tonal areas are carved or etched into, in this case, a very large sheet of copper. Oil-based ink was pushed into the depressions. That's what this fellow is doing up here. The surface is then wiped clean, and the inked plate with the paper on top is forced through a press, as you can see here. The intaglio techniques were engraving, that tool, the burin, was used to create fine tapered lines and the legends. So the legends you can see here. And it's a little hard to discern, but some of the straight lines were almost certainly engraved into the plate. Etched lines, which could be done much more freely, were used to create the more organic, more amorphous, wiggly lines. And then aquatint was used to create the tonal areas. So all of this area here, if you ignore the blue background, this part of an aquatint plate was put in the acid for quite a long period of time. This part, not quite so long, and that parts, all the lighter parts were in the acid for a much shorter period of time. That way you get a very wide tonal range to use for backgrounds, for example. Typical characteristics of intaglio printing are plate marks, you can see here on the left, and the compression of paper where the damp paper is in contact with the smooth copper surface. The inked lines in intaglios are above the surface of the paper, so the ink is sitting on top of the paper, which makes these prints very, very susceptible to abrasion. And I hope you can perhaps get a little bit of a feel for the three-dimensionality of these more heavily inked areas. The plates were hand-colored primarily by women who used Audubon's original drawing as their guide. So Audubon was moving between the United States and London all during the production of this book. All of the work was done in London, and he sent all of his original drawings, which are now for the most part in the New York Historical Society, over to England, and those were used as guides for the colorists to color these extraordinary color prints. The following details, and I'm going to run through these fairly quickly. I don't know if we can turn any more lights off so that you can get the full effect of some of these details. And these are not shown to scale, obviously. These are all from the University of Michigan Library set, volume 1.2, which is plates 50 through 100. These reveal just a little of the skills of the printers, the colorists, and Audubon, the artist. And you have to remember that you're looking at a huge blow-up of something that is actually relatively small. It is impossible with photography, at least the way I had to take the photographs for this talk, to capture some of the really incredible iridescent qualities of the coloring, which occurs not through the application of iridescent paints, but simply the juxtaposition of different colors to create what the eye sees as an iridescence. This plate reminds me here of the trouble that Audubon got into with the so-called scientists in Philadelphia at the American Philosophical Society, because they swore up and down that snakes did not climb trees. And where they used that as an excuse to kind of ban Audubon from any academic societies. And of course, they were later proven wrong. This is a frog under attack. And again, this is probably about 2 inches large. The coloring is, again, absolutely stupendous in this work of art. The passenger pigeon. This is really, oh, well, it looks much better on the screen than it does on my monitor, I'm happy to say. This looks very washed out here. I love this. There's a little engraved line that comes down from a tree branch. This is a very strange looking spider, I guess it's supposed to be. I think this is a cowbird, but the iridescence in this coloring is really magnificent, and it just simply doesn't show up here at all. Now, on to the viviparous quadrupeds of North America. As already mentioned, in 1838, Audubon's first masterpiece combining art and science, The Birds of America, is finished. He estimated he spent $115,640, not calculating any of my expense or that of my family for upwards 14 years. So essentially what he's talking about is what he paid Havel in order to undertake this project. In 1839, in addition to publishing the last volume of the ornithological biography, he published the index of this work, a synopsis of the birds of America. Also that year, J.T. Bowen, a renowned Philadelphia publisher, was selected by Audubon, I guess he was back into favor in Philadelphia, to produce a lithographic version of the Birds of America using a camera lucida to reduce the original images proportionally. This is known as the octavo or miniature version of the Birds of America. 65 additional plates were added to this version. It was issued in 7 volumes, so the last in 1844. In 1845, Audubon's last great project was the Viviparous Quadrupeds of North America, also published by Bowen, and as has already been mentioned, in 3 volumes, each containing 50 plates. The 3-volume text by the same name was published in both London and New York between 1846 and 1853. In 1846, Audubon's eyesight had failed to the extent that his son, John Woodhouse Audubon, had to complete the original drawings for the last part of the work. And you see here that he is given credit for the work that he did. In 1851, in January, John James Audubon died at age 65. The major features of this work are, as was true for the birds, the VQs, which is how I'll refer to them, were issued in sets of 5 plates per number, but there are no discernible differences that I could see anyway between the animal sizes and the order that they were presented. Every print was printed on handmade paper, which measured 22 inches by 28 inches and is often referred to as imperial folio. Whether this is watermarked or not, I don't know. It wasn't possible for me to inspect this volume closely enough to see whether the paper is watermarked. It doesn't appear to be watermarked. The small animals are depicted in the legends as natural size, and when larger, the proportion is noted as a fraction of natural size. So for the little shrew over here, that's natural size. For the wolverine, can't read that, but I think it's 3/4 natural size, and for the American bison, it's 1/7 the natural size. As also true for the birds, as the end of the publication loomed, more species were discovered, but additionally, or just like before, rather than adding more plates, groups of animals appeared in a plate. The drawings below were by John Woodhouse Audubon. You can see that there are 2 squirrels here and 2 legends, and here there are 4 animals depicted, rather small ones, so they're grouped together. Lithography, the relatively new printing invention at this time, was used to create the images and legends. Because the image lies flat on the surface of the paper, as opposed to intaglio, which lies on top of the paper, this technique is also referred to as planographic. In this technique, the image is drawn on the polished surface of a thick slab of limestone using a greasy medium, either an ink and brush, or pen and ink, or a crayon. Thus, the image looks very similar to a drawing because it is made, actually, just exactly like a drawing. Lithography is a complicated chemical process. The stone surface is etched in the non-drawn-upon, non-printing areas, allowing those hydrophilic or water-loving areas to absorb water during printing. In the areas of drawing that are greasy, and the areas of drawing are greasy and thus resist etching, and they remain oleophilic or oil-loving. These areas ink up with the application of an oil-based printing ink during printing. Lithography is based on the principle that oil and water do not mix. And here you see a lithography shop. You have a workman who is polishing the surfaces of two stones by polishing them together with some very fine grit in between. Here's the copyist who's taking the original drawing and copying it onto the stone. And of course, everything has to be reversed because the image on the printing surface has to be wrong reading in order to be printed right reading. So if you can imagine taking all these drawings and reversing them in order to get them on the printing surface. A proof of the stone is made on this little proof press, and then it, once approved for printing, it's put onto a production press. Some of the other major features or differences between intaglio and lithography. Lithography lends itself to creating many different effects, including easily making white lines on a dark background simply by removing the greasy medium to create either white lines or flecks. And you can see some of these lines, which are very organic because they simply are just scraping through this greasy medium. These flecks are made with a tapered tool in order to create these. These are porcupine quills. In the intaglio version, here you have aquatint, which in some cases is simply the tone is scraped down so that that area doesn't capture ink and therefore doesn't print black. And in this particular case, the watercolor is laid on fairly thickly, and then using probably the end of a brush, the watercolor is just removed by the end of the brush. This is a very common watercolor technique of the 19th century. All plates are hand-colored, presumably again by women, using the original drawings as their guide. As soon after this book was published, chromolithography, made popular by firms such as Curator and Ives, was used to print images in full color, eliminating the need for hand coloring. The following details, again not to size, were taken from all 3 volumes of the U of M Clements set. Here's the porcupine. Some floral or details. I particularly like this one here. It's just a little ghost that kind of appears out of the background. And perhaps in this coloration, you can see the juxtaposition of this red and purple to give this very kind of vibrant effect. Here's an armadillo. Although I have to say that the details and the scales of the armadillo, if they had been done by a younger Audubon and Havel, I think would have been much more interesting than this rather flat rendition. Neither the birds nor the beasts are particularly gentle creatures, and so you see things as they happened. There's our friend the wolverine again, and this very cheeky chipmunk. I love this chipmunk. Everyone who has a cat will recognize this pose. And in the background, you can also often find these little vignettes of life. Here's a little shack out in the woods someplace, a farmer plowing the field. Here's another field and the kind of fencing that was used. So these, again, as somebody already mentioned, are really good ways before photography of recording just very simple, ordinary life, particularly out in the non-urban areas. Here you have mice, actually in the home, which is a very unusual depiction. Almost all animals are depicted as you would expect, outdoors. We have a teepee here. And then I thought I would end with an Audubon self-portrait of himself as a huntsman. I didn't show you the whole thing, which he has just shot a deer, and the deer is dying in the plate, and it was just way too upsetting. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, Martha, and Kathy. And now we would like to offer the chance to not only comment on each other, or we can take questions from the audience. I expect we will have some good ones. All right. Who shall go first? In the back, yes.
You were talking about how the print had to be reversed. The original drawing had to be reversed.
Yes.
How was that done?
Well, thank you.
It's on.
It's on? I think probably the most common way was to create a grid on the surface that obviously would not print afterwards. And then you just had extremely talented people who could reproduce what they were looking at in reverse.
Yes.
In the plates, does he tell where the animals and the birds, what state they're in, or?
Certainly in the birds, he almost always gave a location if a location was depicted. Sometimes, however, not. If it was a shorebird, the birds would just be on the shore and wouldn't necessarily say where that shore was located. I should say that Audubon, we always associate Audubon with nature conservation, but he really, in order to get the detail that he needed to get, he killed all of his specimens. He of course observed them out in the wild, but he drew from dead specimens that were wired up into appropriate poses.
So then he traveled? He must have traveled.
Oh yes, he
wide?
traveled all over the United States.
I guess Audubon also wasn't a great oil painter to begin with, but he tended to have something that was more mobile for him to paint with, which is why he was using the media that he chose to make his original drawing.
Yes, and the media, well, of course, he did everything life-size, so he had to originally draw everything life-size, which meant he was carting around very large sheets of paper in some cases. He used primarily watercolors, but also pastels, chalk, collage, all kinds of techniques were used to create the original drawings, which again are in the New York Historical Society.
Hi, Rebecca?
I can't wait to teach with these. So I have a question for each one of you. Two of them are short and one is a little more involved. For Martha, how are these going to be accessible to students?
Sorry. Well, I'm assuming you would bring your students as a group, as a class?
Special collections so they can read through them?
Yes,
or
yep.
compare?
You just make arrangements with us, and we'll make sure to have everything set out and ready for you to use. We'll give you and the students some instructions on how to handle the volumes and everything like that. But they're there. We have them to be used. So.
So come on over, or up, I guess.
For Kevin, the provenance, do we know whether this set was owned by a gentleman or a scholar, or for what purposes?
Well, we had a lot of provenance questions because the possibility of purchase came up just as Monuments Men came out as a film. And there were some folks in parts of the university who wanted me to trace the set back to Audubon so that we could prove that it was not Nazi loot. And they finally, it was a wonderfully interesting question for them. For me, that seemed illogical and impossible. Our dealers purchased it from the Haverhill, Massachusetts Public Library, which had owned it for well over a century, presumably received as a gift from a Haverhill businessman or a Haverhill collector, but they had no records to prove that. And for a while, the purchase was in abeyance on that question. But we finally were able to persuade the folks holding it up that it's highly unlikely that a set of Audubon traveled from America over to Europe, was stolen from somebody during the Second World War, and somehow made it back to the Haverhill Public Library in 1897. So, but this took hours of my time. Believe me, this was days of negotiation and checking. Haverhill didn't have the records to prove original ownership. They did have original records to prove the set that they sold to Dartmouth, which had been Daniel Webster's set. At one point, Haverhill Public Library had 2 copies of the Audubon quads. They now have 0. So we have good provenance, but not back to the original maker with a receipt from Audubon or his son saying that it was paid for. So we can take it back a century.
I wanted to ask you, Kathy, I noticed when you were showing the birds, the plants looked like they were in good condition, and the beasts, often the leaves, everything is kind of crumbling and decayed, and I wondered if you've looked at all of them. Is that a pattern? Is that a reason? There's a lot of life and death wrapped up in these.
There's a lot of life and death. I mean, it's just natural, the natural way of existence. I would say that the decay level runs the gamut. Probably most things are shown in fairly good condition, but sometimes decayed vegetation looks better, more exciting, more interesting than just a green leaf. So, and of course the animals are shown not necessarily in, peak condition either. Dead, dying, wounded animals exist. That's the way things are. So he was not romantic in the sense that he made these animals or birds more than they actually were. But I think the way he presents them, we see them as perhaps bigger on the plate than we tend to think about them normally. Mm-hmm.
Audubon, when he was making the original paintings, did this through a series of years and at different seasons. So I think as his eyes captured the images at the time when he did these, sometimes the flora and fauna were reflective of the seasonal changes.
That's absolutely right. And you do see a few winter scenes, not very many winter scenes, but certainly springtime versus fall is well represented in the drawings and the plates.
I wonder if you might touch on Audubon also in terms of the engravers and lithographers. He was kind of ahead of his time. It seemed like he could carry that.
You have to speak up, please.
Into the from the octavos into it seemed to be at the cutting edge in terms of a lot of the techniques being used at that time, from engraving in England at the time, type of engraving to the new lithography, and then later chromolithography with the later 1860s.
Yes, the question is, or statement is, that Audubon was at the cutting edge of technologies when he decided to go on to do these very large, expensive projects. I think that's certainly true. He certainly understood what these technologies were all about and constantly berated Havel about making sure that your colorists are using good colors, making sure that your hot plate person is not, ruining the plates after they're colored. And we have to keep reminding ourselves that he did this long distance, back and forth across the Atlantic Ocean. And it's an amazing project to do when you're in your publisher's backyard, but to do it in that time with having to rely on sailing ships, basically, as your major way of transportation is pretty astounding.
Yes, Helen?
I have two questions. Excuse me. How in the world, if the colors remain so vivid, but almost 200 years gone by?
They're in a book. No, I'm not kidding. They're in a book. Most of the fading of colors, if a color is susceptible to fading, it's susceptible to light damage. So bound in a book is absolutely the safest way to preserve those colors. Disbinding Audubons is something that happens all the time, and when you compare a disbound plate to a bound plate, you will often see a fair amount of fading of the colors because of the fact that they've been framed and put up on walls and have been exposed to light for a long period of time.
Joan?
Second question is, how many other sets of both the birds and the bees exist around the world?
Well, I have to say, I don't know that much about the publication of the VQs in terms of how many sets were made. Waldemar Fries made a survey of birds of America, I think back in 60s, and he was pretty sure about 200 sets were made in all. I think he traced the location of maybe about 150 or 160 of those sets. We have since found more sets. The set at Syracuse, he did not know where that came from, and I found out where that came from. Because I looked in the ornithological biography. There was nothing in the plate volumes. Nobody ever looks at the text volumes. And Haller Nutt of Longwood House in Natchez, Mississippi, was the owner of Syracuse University's set. And nobody knew that before I looked. So always look.
Is there also, I think Audubon had his repository for all of the sales, and I can't remember if it's at the Henderson Museum or if it's up in the Newark Historical.
Yes, I don't know. But he did keep very good records of who he sold his books to.
Just Joan, please.
Were these ordered by subscription, or did they just print them first?
Well, they did both. Originally, he went out and drummed up subscriptions to pay for the publication. And he had a subscriber. In fact, if you open up the first or second volume, you'll see a list of subscribers to the work. And originally, the production was so slow that when a number of 5 plates was made, these would be rolled up in tin containers, rolls basically, and shipped to the owner. And then it was the owner's responsibility to, once he had gathered enough plates to have them bound. But once the publication really ramped up under Havel Jr.'s supervision by about 1833, then they started producing plates so fast, and there was so much damage done by plates shipped in these metal cans that they decided to have the sets bound and sold as bound sets. And the owner seemed to be perfectly happy with that. But he didn't have 200 subscribers. A lot of books were sold on spec.
Yes.
What happened to the originals of the quadruped set? I know you said what happened to the originals of the birds.
The original drawings? Yes, I don't know, actually.
No, I don't know either.
Somebody probably has them.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Is there much record of the discussion by the board to purchase the birds, or of Zena Pitcher's, where his interest in this came from?
The only thing that I'm trying to remember back, it's been a while since I did the research about the purchase. I went back and looked at records that people had reported on in the 19th century and early 20th century about what was happening. And that's how we found out that the purchase was actually made in 1839 rather than 1838, which was the preferred date for the purchase. Beyond pretty much what I've said today is what we know. There's a lot more in the record about the back and forth between Coleman, the book dealer. I should say that Coleman cobbled together a set of these Audubons to be sold to this library. They were almost all very late versions of the plates because the watermarks of the first volume tend to be 1837, 1838. So we know they were still making prints of the very earliest plates, even 10 years later.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
This has been fascinating. My question is process. So he made originals while he was on the road. Then they were made into plates, and then plates were made into the final, the pieces. So there was a lot of other people involved, including the artists. And I wonder how close, especially the birds, because we know they are in New York, how close is the final product to what he had originally done? I see so much detail that has to happen in all those sketches.
They're almost perfectly the same. They are amazingly true. And Audubon would not have liked it any other way.
One more question?
So the birds are so iconic, and they come up so much in literature and novels, and just this book that just came out this year, All the Light You Cannot See, which is also a World War II book. It's like the symbol of purity and freedom is one Audubon print. And I just was wondering, from an educational standpoint, what is your expectations for the quadrupeds and the engagement with students and, and the role at the university? Are they going to ever, are they the same way in that they are so romantic and iconic? Do you have high expectations?
Well, I'll say there's a Wolverine in the quadruped.
Well, they are.
And there's a whole bunch of squirrels, too. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a good question. I think, we want to make these available. We want to engage students with them. We want to reach out to faculty in all different units across campus. And I have to say too that we're kind of open to ideas from those of you who teach or would like to bring your students to view these works. If you have ideas about how we could do that, we're certainly open to that. Kevin, do you have any plans?
Well, with Clayton and the other folks who our curators work all the time with faculty in 15 or 20 teaching departments, we live for the philosophy that having students use the real thing is something that this university can offer that most universities can't offer at the same level. There's a difference between using the birds or the quadrupeds in the original over looking at it on a computer screen. And for me, that's an emotional as well as intellectual difference. But even if you don't care about the original, there are many things you can learn and teach from the originals that you can't do from reproductions or a very nicely digitized image on a computer screen. So I think this is a big deal, and teaching with collections has become a major focus of the university in my time here, both for justifying the existence of the collections, but emphasizing something that this university has collections in libraries, museums, the botanical gardens, et cetera, that make coming here a much more special experience for a student than many other universities on this planet. And universities really ramped up on this intellectually and philosophically. So acquiring something like the Quadrupeds is a step in a direction the university has chosen to go in offering something that most schools in America cannot offer to their students. And I hope the students on this campus will take advantage of that opportunity, because you can't do it at most universities.
Where will they be kept?
Well, while we're down on Ellsworth, they will certainly be here at the Hatcher Library. I think after we move back, we'll be 150 feet apart. We'll work it out. It makes sense for each of the two units to have a volume for someone who pops in and says, I'd like to see one. But again, it's exactly 150 feet from the north door of the Clements to the south door of Hatcher, and then it's an elevator ride. And we will certainly make it available to any faculty member, any student, any member of the public who wants to see these. Just give us a little advance notice, maybe, rather than it's 4:45 on a Friday afternoon, and I want to see them, and I want to see them all right now. The two departments this isn't a turf war. We've acquired these, and these are university property. They don't belong to the Clements, and they don't belong to the Special Collections Library. So,
Thank you very much, everyone.